So it's my pleasure to introduce this panel. One of the panel members I travelled to Geneva with many years ago. But the others I've only just met this morning, but I'll just introduce them to you. They collectively have many years engagement in Indigenous affairs, but particularly in the area of justice. Just when you ask each of them, well, how long have you, and they say, well, justice, let me think about that. You can see them all calculating, well, I've been around for doing this role and that role, and I've been doing things and that. So each one of them talking about how they've had decades and decades of experience in Koori justice. Our speakers are Dr Alf Bamblett, who's the chairperson of the Victorian Aboriginal Justice Advisory Committee. He's also CEO of Victorian Aboriginal Community Services Associated and president of the Advancement League. And he's an elder within the Victorian community. He's probably known to many of you. That's Mr Alf Bamblett. Next we have Ian Hamm, who's a Yorta Yorta man. He's a Director for Indigenous Economic Development. He's previously been Director for Aboriginal Affairs Victoria and is the Chair for Connecting Home. That's Ian Hamm. We have also Professor Kate Auty, who is the first magistrate of the Shepherd and Koori Court, Commissioner for Environment and Sustainability Victoria, and is a senior lawyer for the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. So that's Kate. And our final member for the panel is Rosemary Smith, who's a Palawa woman from Tasmania, the third Aboriginal solicitor admitted to the bar in Tasmania, has worked on the Royal Commission into Deaths in Custody and the Bring Them Home Task Force, and is manager of Koori programs and court services. That's Rosemary. So, Uncle Alf, can we start with you? The format will be, we'll get to hear from each of the panel members, and then we'll open it up for a bit of dialogue and discussion. And I've got no doubt that the dialogue that we generate, the discussion we generate, will take us through to our lunchtime. And we'll probably get close to lunch and want to keep going, but food will be wafting into our, it'll be like, I'm starting to get hungry by then. So, Uncle, you've been involved, and when I asked you how long, you said, proper. Yeah, well, so it's proper long time. In Aboriginal English, proper long time. But clearly, as a leader who's been around in this area for a while, how important do you see the role of us as Aboriginal community having our voice? And what role do you think the deaths in custody played in doing that? It's from there, it's fine.
I think that, I know that, in fact, if we promote issues like reconciliation, if we promote equality, if we promote in the Australian vernacular, fair go for everybody, then in fact you can't go past the fact that there needs to be a voice, an opinion, a direction, and a face that's distinctly Aboriginal. But I'm a bit ahead of myself. I do need to acknowledge the fact that we're on the land of the Wurundjeri people, and it's important that we do that wherever you go in this landmass called Australia. You're on Aboriginal land. Over 600 nations of Aboriginal people, and it's important that we do acknowledge the fact that Aboriginal people are here first. Back to the length of time and the desire, I suppose, or the direction that you would want to have is to make sure that Aboriginal people are able to inform the debate, are able to participate and be respected as I'm going to use the word partners, but partners isn't the way that this country is at. I think that we have agreements and we have associations, but I don't believe we have true partnership. And until we have, because with true partnership, you have to recognise that there is this other group or this other body or these other people who have something to share and have something to give, and you need to recognise the fact that there's the value added that they bring to the debate is something that's really, really important and should be respected as equals and as a way forward, providing the way forward. Other than that, we have agreements that we sign and we continually have partnerships that we're involved in, but I don't think it's partnerships. It's more a business deal that we enter into to say, well, you have a place in all of this, but nonetheless, I think we're still found wanting in terms of addressing the needs, aspirations, hopes, and the way forward for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. You don't want an hour of that.
Thanks. So, in terms of the role that death in custody played, you mentioned to me before that without that particular commission, we wouldn't have the kind of justice agreements like we have here in Victoria.
It's rather ironic when you look at it, because without the study of the 99 lives, without the work that was put into that, without there being some direction that came forward, then we wouldn't have, I guess, the prominence, if you like, within the justice arena that we do. I think there's a whole lot of things that we fall short on, but nonetheless it's about how that there is this recognition or some sort of cognizance of the Aboriginal participation and all, apart from being victims of 99 deaths and one warder charged over it all because he was out of uniform at the time. Unbelievable. But it's the sort of thing then about the deaths in custody, what it did. There's a whole host of things. One of them is certainly looking at this sort of a gathering, allowing this sort of a gathering and the people in it to have some input into this magical, wonderful, boring, horrible thing called Aboriginal affairs, but all good. But it's about Aboriginal people having a voice. We looked at things like the 67 referendum. It was going to change the world. I think the next one is, what is it? What are we doing now? And I think the expectations are that it will change the world again. And I don't want to be pessimistic about your work and the work that other people do, because I do the same thing. But it is about how much and what are the gains, I think, at the end of that phase. And then we have to consider what next. But certainly, making sure that we've got Aboriginal people have a voice, and Aboriginal people are able to express that voice, either through those agreements or arrangements that we make, or people such as yourselves making time to listen and to be involved with Aboriginal people in one form or another. It really is, for me personally, an extraordinary thing that if you watch people talk and then you actually see what they're saying, where they're heading and how, in fact, where they want to take you, and whether or not you can actually get a hearing by people for the sorts of things that many of our mob need, and to be able to make some sort of an impact.
Thanks. And Ian, you also mentioned that you've been involved in a number of roles. So from your current role as director, but also the other roles you've had over the last, 10, 20, 30 years, how do you see this role around the voice of, the importance of the voice of Aboriginal community in progressing Aboriginal affairs?
I guess that question, or that idea of how Aboriginal people have been engaged has changed over time. Picking up what Alf said, is that the 67 referendum, for example, Aboriginal voices in driving that was relevant to its time, I suppose. But that how Aboriginal people are engaged in what our future is has changed over time as well. Certainly, I would say now, the complexity of issues before us require us to have a different way of engaging, a different focus in confronting all the things that are on the agenda at the same time. It is also part of the evolution of, in our case, Aboriginal Victoria. Aboriginal Victoria now is different to what it was 30 years ago. It's not the same thing. It's changed a lot. I think where the justice agreement in Victoria has contributed to how we as a community have become more sophisticated. Alf's right in one sense when he says it's not true partnership, but then I struggle to think what is true partnership. Are we in a better place than we were prior to the justice agreement? Yes. Is there a long way to go? Yes, there is. I suppose what it reflects now and what we've tried to bring into other parts of government, and indeed more pertinently how the Aboriginal community has adapted to that change, is that we've moved from universally standing at the barricades and shouting at the walls of Jericho, as it were, to now being inside the tent, being part of the discussions about how things may evolve. That doesn't necessarily mean you always get things the way you want, and I think that is part of how these arrangements work. And there is a hierarchy of who calls the shots. That happens. But I think as time's moved on, that is evolving and changing. On the other side of that, and I say this as somebody who's a career public servant, is the changing nature of government itself. Government in Australia is not what it used to be by a long shot, and therefore its role and relationship with different parts of the Australian community has changed as well. If we look at our political parties, they're not the broad churches they used to be. They're quite narrow beasts. You go into a party, whichever one it is, but you generally go into one of the two and a half parties that will form government in this country at a very young age. You do it at university. If you're in the Labor Party, you go off to a union, or you work for a few law firms, you get pre-selected, or you go and work in the Minister's office, blah, blah, blah. The Liberal Party, you often work for a few law firms, or you go into some other business entities, you work for ministers' offices, you get pre-selected. So they're not the broad churches they used to be, which means the ideas that come from them aren't as expansive from the general community as they used to be too. So leaping forward to where we are now, it's not great in government at the moment. I think we saw in the last federal election, neither party particularly, I think, sparked a thing in anyone. It was kind of, most people voted for who they didn't like the least. But there was no light on the hill moment. So government, while we should have great expectations of our governments, we shouldn't expect a lot. Which means the role of those not engaged in government becomes far more prominent and can no longer be a simple message shouting at the walls of Jericho and expect it to fix. You've got to get inside and help run things and actually bring forward those agendas and complexities that perhaps we used to seek from government. Has the Aboriginal community done that and led that or been part of that in terms of the justice stuff? Yeah, it has. The justice agreement itself is quite a complex document. I mean, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that would not have got up. But now we have a quite complex arrangement, a cooperative arrangement that still needs a lot of work, and there is a long way to go on it. But it's required the Aboriginal community to be part of where this is going and not have the expectation that somebody else should do it, in this case government. And I think that that's true of wider society too, that really there is a necessity for us to own these things simply as citizens if we're going to drive change in whatever area it is. And the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, for mine, and I'll be honest, I was the Executive Director of Aboriginal Affairs and the Deputy before that. I took what was done with the Justice Agreement and thought, can we use that model in a range of other things? And that's what we did. So I think we've, over time, changed, I hope are changing, the nature of the relationship between, in this case, government and the Aboriginal community, but a lot of that came out of the Justice Agreement. And particularly things like the Aboriginal Justice Forums, which, if anybody's been to those, are terribly interesting. If you're a public servant at them, they're terribly bloody scary, I can tell you that much. But they are never dull, and they always have a point. So I can't even recall the question you asked me, but that's kind of setting the scene.
Thanks. And in terms of your... from your perspective, coming from Tasmania and into Victoria as well, over these years, what have you seen as what you regard as the practice or the way that the justice agreement has been put together. How do you see it, having seen coming from two different states and seeing its development over the years?
I mean, Victoria and Tasmania have had a really long relationship. I myself came over and did a couple of placements with VOW, so I mean, I got very familiar with what some of the issues were here as well. But look, the Aboriginal Justice Agreement for me is one of the most strongest agreements I've ever seen between government agencies, I mean, and the community. And, you know, like I sit in awe at the community members that sit around that table, because they really dictate to the members around that table about what they want. And especially when we have the community forums. The community forums are an opportunity for the local community members to put up their hand about some issues that are impacting them. Now, whether it's to do with corrections, police, courts, sheriffs, or education, people that are in that room, from other government agencies, are held accountable and they have to answer. And we, in our previous secretary, they would make sure that they would have that answer at the end of that day, you know, to be able to report back to the community members. One of the strongest things I think for me is to see that people actually around the table contribute significantly about, and visitors to the Aboriginal Justice Agreement contribute. I mean, we just had one Aboriginal Justice Agreement just recently, and we had the Secretary of Education. Now, you know, he was grilled, and he must have been worded up about he was going to be grilled, because, you know, education have let us down quite a bit over the years in the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. You know, because a lot of our kids are going before the criminal justice system who have been so disengaged from education, and why is that allowed to continue? You know, and they need to be at the table to contribute what they need to do in regards to resolving some of the issues. The questions that the Secretary was asked was really, you know, you could tell that he had done his homework, because he was able to respond and what he wasn't able to respond to, he said he would get back to the Aboriginal Justice Forum about it. It is an opportunity for different government agencies like courts and sheriffs and corrections and to showcase some of the programs that they have, because the Aboriginal Justice Agreement is a reporting, we have to have, this is our third Aboriginal Justice Agreement. And when you think about it, in 1997, when all the Attorney Generals got together to say, well, what states have implemented any recommendations of the Death in Custody, and they had to shamelessly say that not many at all. So they made a commitment to come back to their own states and develop their own Aboriginal Justice Agreement. Victoria, is my understanding, is the only one that's up to the third phase of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. Now, we had an evaluation of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, you know, over the last couple of years, and while the increase of Aboriginal people in custody in criminal justice system has increased, it would be really concerning if we didn't have the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. You know, so, but some of the programs that we have got are really, really well regarded and respected, not just on a national level, but at an international level. You know, the Koori Court, we are having visitors from overseas that want to come in and have a look at the Koori Court processes and how it is operating, and the input of the elders. The Koori Court, now we have 10 Koori Courts, and that's 8 in the magistrate's jurisdiction and the Children's Court. We also have 2 county Koori Court operating, one down in Latrobe and one in Melbourne. One of the things that we need to be doing all the time is looking at what other programs that need to be implemented in the court and tribunal environment, and this is our tool, if you like, to be able to ensure that we have those programs to be developed in partnership with the community. And all our initiatives have been developed in partnership with community. The Wagungu Nalu program, which is celebrating its 5 years of existence down in Yarram tomorrow, is a 20-bed residential program. It's a partnership with the community and corrections, and it's where young men can carry out their community-based orders in a really culturally safe environment. Oh, sorry. And I'm probably talking too fast. Sorry about that. I was talking about the Koori men's residential program down at Yarram, which is a 20-bed residential program where Aboriginal men get to do their community-based orders, and they get referred to there by the courts from all around the state. And, you know, the men can carry out their orders there. They can actually participate in some cultural activities. A lot of men have been have had great success going through those that process. The Aboriginal Justice Agreement Phase 3 is looking at developing a Koori women's diversionary program, and we're in the very early stages of that development. So for me, the Aboriginal Justice Agreement is like my Bible, you know, and while it's Alf might not think it's and say it's not a strong partnership. I think it really is, because I see more community voice in that process than I've seen in years of working in Aboriginal affairs.
Thanks.
Just before I finish,
sure.
Can I just also mention that several years ago the then Premier asked all the government departments and agencies to develop their Koori Inclusion Action Plan as part of the Closing the Gap. Now, every single department and agency had to develop their Koori Inclusion Action Plan, and so too did the Department of Justice. And so all those 17 agencies or units that are under the Department of Justice had to develop their Koori Inclusion Action Plan, and that also includes courts and tribunals. Now, those KIAPs, or Koori Inclusion Action Plans as we call them, they are things that all the business units have agreed to or made a commitment to do, things like ensure that the Koori Inclusion Action Plan is part of their business plan, ensure that it's part of the senior management's professional development. And one of the areas that we are asked for is that people acknowledge traditional custodians before every meeting and pay respect to the elders past and present, and also to have their staff undertake cultural awareness training, also to, you know, develop partnerships with community, and that is one of the key actions that all areas have put into their action plan.
And Kate, in your years of experience as well in the legal service, we're hearing more about how the Justice Agreement, the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, is a way in which different parts of society are able to engage together, be that community, government, legal, corrections, police, etc. What do you see as some of the key features of the Justice Agreement and how you've seen it develop and grow over the years?
Thanks. I'll start with acknowledging Wurundjeri people and just say that being here today reminds me of the very first time I ever went to the Advancement League, which many of you will also have been to. I want to acknowledge in particular women who've had a lot to do with me, mentored me, people like Auntie Winnie Quagliotti, Molly Dyer, Rochelle Patton, all of whom have enriched my life. They've made me a more thoughtful person, they've made me a more considerate person, and they've made me aware of the sorts of struggles that they've had to go through in really engaging, respectful, embracing ways, and they didn't have to do that. And that brings me to what you're all doing here. You're all here for reconciliation. It's a tough conversation we have to have. We are a country that still has a constitution that allows for racial discrimination. We are a country that still has a constitution that doesn't recognise Aboriginal people as the First Nations or the First People. We are a country that predicates all of our wealth on what we have striven to take from people when we first arrived here. And I can speak with some authority about that. My family arrived here in the 1830s down there on the Port Melbourne beach, and one of my great-great-grandmothers was a person who drove Bunurong people away from the beach. I'm here today to recognise all of that and pay my respects. On justice, let me also just say that everybody here at the table has talked about the Justice Agreement and the third one that Victoria now has. And everybody who's here at the table has in one way or another downplayed the role they've had in driving that Justice Agreement. And I want to say this about that justice agreement, that it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Aboriginal people putting aside legitimate senses of grievance about what justice had done to them and their families, and sitting at a table and trying to bring us all to an honest and honourable conversation about what was happening. And Alf Bamblett was there, arguing the toss, and I well remember one of those meetings when Jenny Makakis got a roasting, and I said to her later, that was a bit of fun, and she said, I come from a Greek family, it's like Christmas. I've seen Ian also strive with these things, much less so because I don't know Ian as well as I know some of the others at this table. And I know Rosie's struggle to do the work that she's done in the department, which has followed on from the work of Rose Coombs, who is the first Indigenous woman made a magistrate in this state, and followed on from the work of Angelina Tabuto Moore. Women. I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, Ian and Alf, but they were very powerful in what happened. The justice agreement is the thing that made the courts come to the table, and it's the thing that drove change. If you do nothing else from today and you've got an opportunity to do it through a website, go and look at the justice agreements. They are instructive. We got them because we weren't having native title. As far as Jeff Kennett was concerned, there was no native title in this particular state, and Angus Frith was one of the people with me who received that letter from Jeff Kennett, and I remember when we got it, we were outraged. But Alf and everybody took it up to them and said, we want an agreement. The agreement came out of that particular refusal to accept native title in this state. The agreement made the Magistrates' Court consider a number of things. And I'm no longer a magistrate. I resigned from Victoria to go to WA, and I resigned from WA to come back here. But I was a magistrate at the time. The agreement made us do things which would seem to be totally self-evident. They said, get yourself an Aboriginal liaison officer. I can remember justice officers in the Magistrates' Court saying to me, why do we need an Aboriginal liaison officer? With me saying, I think we need two. We need a man and a woman. We got one, and we've had some great Aboriginal liaison officers attached to the court. It gave us another task. It told us that we had to get involved in making sure that there were some Aboriginal bail justices in this state, because when the agreement first came into play, there were no Aboriginal people engaged in making bail decisions in this state at all. By the time we finished the first training, and the court was, I'm proud to say, part of that process under the previous or a long time ago Chief Magistrate Michael Adams. By the time we finished, I think there were 35 Aboriginal bail justices. How many was the 21 the first time round, and now how many are there, Rosie?
Oh, well, I think we've lost quite a few, so we've only got about 10.
10. Well, we need to get some recruits there just like you do at Antar. However, it gave us another job, and the other job was to make sure that we set up the Koori Court. And the Koori Court came like a wave, like a tsunami into the court in ways that that people still probably struggle to accept or acknowledge. I can remember judicial officers resisting the Koori Court. I can remember them saying it was bullshit. I can remember them saying that it wasn't necessary. I can remember them saying they wouldn't sit on it. I can remember them saying, well, what are the elders going to contribute? I can remember those things. It's not quite as bad as what I remember out of my time in Western Australia, where I remember JPs calling Aboriginal people bungs and niggers in the last 5 years, but it is still something that you need to reflect on. We've come a very long way. Now, having said all of that, I agree with Alf. It's not an even partnership, but it's the partnership that we could have developed. And it is a partnership that's based on the enormous goodwill and commitment of senior Aboriginal people. Alf's sister was one of them, Rochelle Patton's another, Uncle Colin Walker, members of the Morgan family, Joey Day, Paul Atkinson, people who put aside their legitimate grievances or legitimate distrust of the court and came and sat with us. Now, it is about voice. There's no doubt it's about voice, but it's also about presence and about respect. And when Daniel Briggs, who was the first Aboriginal Justice Officer, came into the court and created that position, as did the court and the department and the Aboriginal community, I remember thinking that we were changing things, and we were changing them irrevocably. We have little steps from little things, big things grow, little steps, but those steps are significant. In relation to the court, as the first magistrate to sit in this particular jurisdiction, I can tell you that I was in trepidation. I can tell you that the Aboriginal people who sat with us on that day were in trepidation. I can tell you that every day we sat, and we sat fortnightly, there were times when every one of us had moments of anxiety, and we held each other together in lots of really interesting and collegiate ways. But I can tell you this, that one of the things that really struck me was the first day I walked into the court, and I came through the back door in Shepparton, and we opened the court door into the courtroom, and before me went two very senior Aboriginal people. It wasn't the white judicial officer who knocked on the door and authoritatively came in and sat down and took over. It was two very senior Aboriginal people who preceded the magistrate into the court and sat at the table before the magistrate did. It may seem like a tiny, tiny thing. It was absolutely monumental. It didn't just affect how I felt about things, or how Aboriginal people felt about things, or how the police felt about things, but it affected how the court staff felt about things. They'd spent their time over the counter arguing the toss with young blokes who came in and said, I'm not paying that effing fine because I don't have the money or whatever. And they built up resistances to each other. And we all see that in our relationships with each other, and it doesn't have to be across cultures. We had resistances in the court. I've spoken about them. They're not as bad as the ones that we dealt with in other places, but I certainly was aware of them. The really interesting thing about what happened in that court was that while we still are not even and equal partners, the court staff, who had been, some might regard it as resistant, came along and said we need to do things better. And I had young female court clerks saying to me when I said we need to make a space for Aboriginal people to sit down and have a cup of tea before we go into court, I had them saying to me, well, if we do it on the weekend, can we do it on Sunday because I can't come on Saturday? They weren't being paid for it. We stripped out the library there in Shepparton and we made it a room where people could sit down and talk. And the place became a place where people felt, in my view, and I might stand to be corrected, a place where people could come and expect to be treated respectfully. If there's one thing out of all of this that I drew from that particular experience, both here and in WA, it's that all of this is going to work if we base it on respect. And it was a word that I really didn't, I have to tell you, understand the meaning of when we started, because I just didn't get how it fitted, whether it was a verb or a noun or an adjective. I just didn't get how it fitted. By the time the Koori Court finished with me and probably a number of other magistrates, I think we do get that. We may not always get it right, but we do get it. And just before I shut up, can I just say this? We know we need to do this better, whether it's here or in WA, when as a magistrate or any judicial officer, you're sitting on the bench on, say, a Saturday morning, and a little Aboriginal kid is brought up from the bowels of the court because he's been denied bail, and the reason he's been denied bail as a 12-year-old is because he's given a false name, and the reason he's given a false name is because he was out with a bunch of other kids, and he's given a false name because everybody gives false names because they've all got warrants. And he has never been before the court and doesn't have a warrant. It is so ingrained in the way people think about the justice system that that little kid thought that he must have a warrant because everybody did. And when he gave a false name, it was to avoid the non-existent warrant, and it meant he spent a night in custody. If that's happening in a Western, capitalist, potentially civilised country that has the sort of constitution that we have, then we need to ask ourselves some further questions. Thanks.
We're going to open up to the floor in just a few moments about questions, but I have a question for the panel as a bit of a leading one. You've all shared about different aspects or elements of things like partnerships, agreements, ways that people have learned how to work together. I just wanted if either one of you or all of you from the panel could respond to this question. Sorry. There are stages in when people are trying to learn to work together. There's a stage in which people get to listen and try and understand, and they also tell their side as well, and they hope that the other side listens and understands. And then they can get better knowledge about each other and they can start working together. But then there's also another stage where they are committed to learning new ways of working together. where as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people we have to learn something new, but also the systems and the other side has to learn something new to work together. As you've seen the justice agreement develop, as you've seen the justice world develop over since deaths in custody, where do you think we're at? Are we still at the stage of just listening to each other's side, or are we in the stage of learning new ways together?
I'll have a go at that first with a comparative example. And you're talking about native title. Native title doesn't happen in Victoria anymore because we came up with an act that suits us, because the Native Title Act was constructed for Northern Australia. So it doesn't work here. So we've come up with the Traditional Owner Settlement Act, and the first thing done on it, wholly done on it, is being signed in Bendigo this Friday. So if you've got nothing to do, get up to Roslyn Park and Bendigo. It should be a shindig. But one of the things that came out of that process was that that's basically a process that sets the courts aside. It's basically a contract between the state and the identified traditional owner group around an identified piece of land. But one of the things that came up with native title almost immediately when it did come in, which made Jeff Kennett's job easier about saying there's no native title, was there was a lot of disputation in the Aboriginal community itself. There is no common agreement in some areas about who the traditional owners are. There was boundary issues. You, in fact, in some areas had two groups saying, no, we're the right ones and the other ones are, full of it kind of stuff. So one of the things the Traditional Owner Settlement Act was actually trying to cause an outbreak of peace amongst some of these claimants. So we came up with this, and it was based on a predication which didn't really strike us until we said, well, we've got a way forward that doesn't involve the courts, doesn't involve arguing. This is a gross generalisation, so I'm just going to put that out there to start with, is that as a people, we are terribly good at fighting. We're good for fighting for our rights. When there's a common issue we can come around, we are politically really good. We can muster ourselves, we can organise it and get the job done. But when it comes to resolving things that doesn't involve a fight, or indeed resolving things within our own community, we're actually not terribly good at that, because what we do is we know how to fight. We fight for our rights. We've fought for citizenship, we fought for land rights, we fought for a better outcome with the justice system. But when it moves past the fighting, or you have to do it differently, a lot of our people don't know how to do that. And in the Native Title or the Traditional Owner Settlement Act space, people didn't know how to resolve their differences. They were used to blueing with each other and advocating to a third party to make a decision for them. Now, in the native title case, it was the federal court or a minister, or more recently the Aboriginal Heritage Council, but somebody making a decision where someone wins and someone loses. So we came up with a project called The Right People for Country. To cut a long story short, we based it on the same principles as the Oslo Agreement that the Israelis and the Palestinians did in the mid-90s. Bill Clinton got going. And basically it was the Norwegians shacked up with both sides separately to teach them how to talk to each other, because they didn't know how to actually negotiate. So we brought that into the stuff around these traditional owner groups, give them the skills to be able to negotiate, to have a perspective, and it doesn't mean a fight, but, give and take, how to negotiate. I think one of the things that has shown me is that as a community and as a group of people, and even as government, we're used to being in an adversarial position with each other, particularly in, say, the case of the justice stuff when it first started, an adversarial position of government versus the Aboriginal community. It has taken a lot of learning on both sides to learn how to talk with each other instead of talk at each other, and that's a continuing journey. Are we better at listening? I think we are better at listening. I think we are better at talking to each other. I think we are better at finding what we have in common than what we have as difference. And I think we're better at give and take. Having said that, there is still a long way to go. And a lot of this has to do with the changeover of people in these kind of things, because this isn't about, while individuals can play a terribly important role, these systems keep going and people move in and out of them. And it takes a while, it's like turning the Queen Mary with a paddle. It's not impossible, it's just going to take you a terribly, terribly long time to do, but it's theoretically not impossible. So I'd have to say I think that by and large we have gone forward. but it's taken a while to do, and we still have a long way to go. So those skills, if you like, that people have to have individually and collectively and institutionally are slowly coming around. But there's always days where you go backwards. So not every day is going forwards. There are days when you go backwards as well. So I think that's, if you're asking me where are we, we're better than we were. We still have a long way to go. I guess what I'd ask people to think about is not where we are now, but well, what do we want this to look like in the year 2035? Jump out to 2035. What does this look like? And that's probably what your starting point should be, and then work backwards as in, well, how do we get from where we are now to what this looks like in a generation?
I might add that 87, 88, around that time, I lived out of a suitcase, basically. Is it honest, not honest? There.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. In those years, I really lived out of a suitcase, and people were actually were very concerned about my mental health and about the things that were happening, I guess, in my life. The prime one was travelling the nation to talk to the families of the people who had died in custody, organising meetings with the network that I was in, and I think it was HATSIC at the time, and trying then to provide some answers to the families, and trying to be able to provide some way forward and give people some hope that in fact there would be something that would come under this broad banner of justice. Not lock-ups though, but certainly being able to say, my relo died under those conditions, and being able to talk to families that would say, you know, there needed to be these things done, other things done, and knowing damn well in those meetings that there is this gulf or this big distance between what people were calling for and what the system could actually provide for. And so the hopelessness, the anger, the frustration, the despair, all of those negative things that were actually being projected by members of those families was there on the table for us to try to provide some solution for. And so that's why that issue about a voice and that ability to be able to communicate that we've got that problem, and maybe collectively we can make something good happen out of this. Well, that's probably the driver in many ways for the work done on the development of, firstly, that national focus in terms of the national justice agreements, and the fact that a communique says government will work with Aboriginal communities to forge a way forward and provide some answers. And then in each of the states and the territories, and I might add that Victoria has been the longest lasting justice agreement, and so we look to have perhaps some better lessons out of that. But it goes right back to the fact that, you know, having spent the day listening to the anger, the sorrow, the frustration, all of those negative things, and sitting down with people after the meetings and trying to say, well, okay, this is the things that we need to do. And believe you me, then that time alone in your motel room or hotel room after the day, trying to say, well, here is a message or here is a way forward for us. And you know damn well that the system is set in its way and that there's so many shortcomings that you have to overcome to be able to take it forward. Now, I've never talked to people about that. And it is about that anger and that frustration of trying to work with a system that's pretty set, very set in the way that it does business. The dominance of a system that says you are less than we are. And that was established way back with the raising of that flag. And so the system that came and said, well, we only want particular people to come to this country who look a particular way, who sound a particular way, have a particular culture base, have a belief, which obviously excluded Aboriginal people. So that whole thing about trying to make some sense for the families, the whole thing about trying to be able to say, hang on, cuz, we'll get somewhere with this. It's been a pretty horrifying experience. It's probably helped. I mean, I get to that place, I stand and talk to anybody now. But it's also about the fact that in communities today, Aboriginal people still suffer from deaths in custody. Aboriginal people still suffer from those deaths in custody that happened. And we've got a deadly program. I've got a cap there today. It's about a visitors program that we had. There are other programs that we have that are around trying to make things a bit easier. But there is still the need to make sure that the recognition, the proper recognition, is given to Aboriginal people to take the whole thing forward. There's still the need for that proper recognition. And I didn't say that the Justice Agreement wasn't any good. What I said, if you do partnerships, then there's the expectation that both sides of the partnership will act together, cohort, and actually making things happen. I still believe that we're in the place where we have agreements that we will do particular things. And it doesn't automatically flow that's in accordance with a partnership. And I think there's sort of playing on words, but they're your words, not mine. So it's about on one end of the scale, there are those things that are required to assuage in some way the pain and the suffering. And the other way, try to map out a path forward that's going to mean that we can be quite proud of who we are. So we can be strengthened by who we are and what we do. That we as Aboriginal people have a voice and have thoughts and have ideas and want to progress, I guess, the whole thing about those agreements. But and I think it's shown that way. We're in 3 or 4 now. We've done 3, we're almost on to 4. So it's about the fact that you can sit down at a table and negotiate with some authority about the things that are required. We didn't have that when the Royal Commission started. We didn't have that before Koori Courts came to be. We didn't have that when we had the Wanganga Nala, a place for men to go. We didn't have those things. So out of the time and the efforts put in, there are those programs and services that are in place now that bring some good results. But it depends very, very much on the place of Aboriginal people in the whole scene. And no sort of sitting back and saying, up to you, but we got to do it. It's a part of our responsibility. People know about the people in the pond. Actually, the respect that's required or that can be generated by people who are actively involved in things will generate a circle or a cycle of respect. Self, family, extended family, Aboriginal community, larger community. And if those things are in place, then in fact you can look at it like a pebble in a pond that will flow right through at least those 5 circles. And they're the things, I guess, that we've got to think about. A place for us. Someone with big ears that'll listen.
I'd just like to follow on from Alf too. I mean, look, the Aboriginal Justice Agreement is an agreement, but it is also something that people have got to remember. You can't, over the last 10 years, you can't get rid of what's happened over the last over 200 years of oppression that Aboriginal people have faced. And the health and well-being of Aboriginal people has come about because of the impact of the justice system on this country, and the imposition of the criminal justice system. I mean, my first sitting of the Koori Court up in Shepparton, it blew me away when I went up and Kate was sitting, and it was my role to observe the monitoring, the implementation of the Koori Court model. And Kate, one of Kate's first words were, apart from acknowledging the traditional custodians, and she was saying, federal court up the road there might not have acknowledged, the Yorta people of this country, but this little old court here does, and I thought, good on you, and I thought how proud them people must have been around that table, because, to me, to acknowledge traditional custodians is such a powerful acknowledgement of recognition of the rightful people, and for me to see what's happening with some of the changes in the criminal justice system is great for me too. But the most important thing with the Koori Court is that the judicial system has had to, and we've had it evaluated by a number of different people now. Mark Harris was the first one that evaluated the Koori Court, and then La Trobe Valley University with Alan Kowalski did the Courtroom 7, and the County Court's been evaluated, and they've all said what has been the most highlight of the Koori Courts is that the respect that the elders have and the respect that the elders are given by not just the participants in the Koori Court but also the people that sit around the table. Because their authority has been reinforced out in the community. I mean, the elders, and mind you, some people don't want to go to the Koori Court because they don't want to face them elders, because they know they get shamed. But, sometimes people make a choice of going because to go to the Koori Court you have to plead guilty, you have to take responsibility of your action. So that is a big decision for people to make, but I don't know, Kate, in the time that you said, I don't think in the time that I've observed the Koori Court that there's been anybody that's come to the court where they haven't been guilty. I mean, because, and people choose, they're in the Children's Court, when we developed the Children's Court legislation, we made it so young people could plead not guilty in another court but have the sentencing process in the court. The community has a big concern about that, and we did we did a consultation around community about would the community like to see the court process change and open it up to contested matters, and the community made a decision that they didn't. So, everything has to be reviewed. All the programs has to be reviewed. Now, we might say that, there's some working things that are working well, but there's some things that really need improvement. The numbers are still going up in the criminal justice system. The numbers are increasing still in the family division of the Children's Court. We've got over 1,000 children in out-of-home care. Only 200 of them are with Aboriginal families, 800 of them other children are with non-Aboriginal families. Are we going to have another generation of lost generation of children? And that's a real concern. And you have a community organisation who's under-resourced, like VACA. VACA, gets resource for not even a couple of hundred. Is that right, Alf, do you think? And yet they're expected to, do more. And that's the thing that the government have to come to realise, that community want to be responsible for community and the families and children, but need to be adequately resourced.
You've got 600 kids in out-home care, 100 who are the responsibility of an Aboriginal agency, the rest are with non-Aboriginal agencies. So where are they going to be in time to come?
Two things. I just want to respond to Rosie's question about guilty pleas in the Koori Court. And in my time in Victoria, there were two cases that came into the court where it was clear that the person was there because they were pleading guilty and they didn't really think they'd done anything wrong. And on both of those occasions, when I was the magistrate, I can't speak for others, I referred them back to the major or main court, back to the mainstream court. And that was because the court itself really is based on this deep well of respect, a deep well of respecting what people bring to it. People will say, well, why can't the Koori Courts deal with pleas of not guilty? Well, then you turn the panel into a jury, then you aggravate the sense that some people have of the potential for payback. There's a whole range of reasons why that doesn't happen. But we were very careful in the court that I shared with the elders to make sure that we didn't have people pleading guilty and feeling like it was not their plea. They had to own it. It's such a hackneyed metaphor, but they had to own it. that was one thing. I just wanted to say too, 2035, Alf, I'm really concerned about that now because of my position as the Commissioner for Environmental Sustainability about climate change. Nobody leave this room without thinking about climate change in 2035, please. Really seriously. The other thing is, Rosie started us talking about the court, so I just want to share a couple of things about the court. And I'll try not to take too long to do it, but every time I get telling these stories, I don't know when to stop. We had one court sit in Shepparton, and a young bloke came up from another jurisdiction, and he came into the court because he had Yorta connections. And I was a little troubled about the fact that he'd committed the offence in another place, and I was a little concerned about whether we should be dealing with it, and I think the panel or the elders were as well. We started the case nevertheless and got going on it in circumstances that really told me that it was the right place to be. He attended the court, ochred, wearing just shorts. One of the elders said, "Can he come into the court like that?" And I said, "It's his court, he can come into the court however he wants to," and he did. He had to come back on a subsequent day and he did the same thing then. Nobody made anything of it. It made him feel like he had some ownership of what was happening. It made him feel like this was in fact his court. Now, he was a Yorta bloke, and the reason that I said that it would be all right, and it was ultimately a decision for the magistrate to cross it across jurisdictions in the state to come into the court, was because one of the very senior women who sits with that panel up there said that he had family in the region and she would talk to his estranged sister. And she did. And the day that we convened that court, the little court up there is about a quarter of the size of this room. Were you there, Rosie, for that day? About a quarter of the size of this room, and it doesn't have the natural light that this beautiful room has. It's got a door and a swing door, and it's a bit Wild West really if you want it to be. But he sat down in the court and he brought with him his family. And in that room there was not a seat to be had, and in that room there was not a piece along the wall that was not to be had, and in that room there was not a piece of carpet that was not to be had, because people filled the room. This Yorta bloke had come back to his place and he was in the court, which was his court in Yorta and Bangarang country, but he was there in that place, and so was his family. He was in real jeopardy of having a suspended sentence of 12 months imposed at that time, because his new offence was like his old offence, and there was a real issue about that, even though he'd nearly got through it, and even though there were other things about that sentence and this issue that had to be taken into account. The senior Aboriginal woman who said it should be in our court had also got his sister to come to court, and his sister sat directly behind him. And so he was sitting there at the table and his sister was sitting directly behind him, and there was not an acknowledgement by him of her at the initial stages of the court case. We got through all the preliminaries, which are the plea of guilty, the reading of the summary, the police involvement, shuffle a few briefs, the lawyer says a few things, etc., and then we started to hear from the community. And the sister started to speak. And she spoke for 20 minutes. And she spoke about what had happened to their family, and it still makes me want to weep. She spoke about what had happened to those kids, and she spoke about their time in the Ballarat orphanage, which is now, of course, a bit famous in another Royal Commission. She spoke about the way they'd been stripped from each other and paired back as a family and lost a sense of connection, and what it had meant to all of them not to have that. And she talked about what that meant in terms of the family, the present, the past, culture, understanding, knowledge, sharing, being able to support each other. When she finished talking, the prosecutor, who had been going to say that the suspended sentence ought to be activated, I invited him to speak, and he said, "I've got nothing to say." There wasn't in that room many a dry eye, and the lad himself, who still had his back to his sister, had softened. His physical presence at the table had perceptibly softened. And she just sat there stoically and honourably and thoughtfully and purposefully talking across centuries of dispossession and disregard for people's rights and criminal behaviour to children. That would never have happened in any other court that we convened in Shepparton or anywhere else in this state. Ultimately, he came back to the court after we got him assessed for a community-based order for what was a very serious assault matter on another person, not a woman, a male. and he was put on a community-based order and went to another part of the state and used his community-based order work to train other kids in cultural knowledge and teach them to dance and paint and live lives that would be valuable and useful to themselves and others. He could have been spending 2 years in a jail, banged up with other people, beating each other up, fighting for the scraps from the table, causing each other ongoing aggravation, and learning nothing except how to be like Ned Kelly, hardened by the experience. The Gorey Court made it possible for that not to happen. The panel made it possible for that not to happen because the panel populated the court.
Thank you. So we have some time now for any questions from the floor. Did you have any questions of panel members specifically or of the panel in general?
Mine's really not a question. It's a comment that I think we must never, ever forget the 99 people who died in custody so that we could have reconciliation. One of the key recommendations from that report was that this country needed to proceed in a process of reconciliation. And Keating called it a 10-year or a decade of reconciliation. As Reconciliation Victoria, Reconciliation Australia, we must always honour those people.
G'day, my name's Greg Kennedy. I'm the State Coordinator for the Koori Youth Council. I'm a Tatty man from Robinvale. My question's for probably for Uncle Alf and maybe Ian if he wants to jump in. I guess coming from youth advocacy, why is it important for young people to have a voice in some of the really critical decisions that are made in our community? And what are the main changes, or the main differences between the landscape that we are in now and how it was perhaps 20, 30 years ago?
Fairly simple, and thanks for the question, but it's, if you look at him, he looks bad, but I look worse. But it's the sort of thing about, obviously, a process of being involved over time and so on. There needs to be the replacements, there needs to be people coming through, taking up the cudgel and making sure that there's the follow-on. We also have, I think, the fact that we can look at our young people today, our young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and say, well, these kids are better versed and perhaps in many ways more knowledgeable at this stage in their life than we were. And I think that's also so important. But I look at so many people that I've been really blessed to know and to be able to follow on from the things that they've done. I used to think that I was just too deadly, sort of talking about things and saying, well, making points about different things. And then I would get this feedback that old uncle said that years ago, that these things had been said before and they've been acted on before. And I, being a little bit slow maybe, thought they were sort of originally my thoughts. But they weren't. And so it goes. And as the community develops, people in the community develop, there needs to be that change and that crossover. And the unfortunate thing about Aboriginal affairs is that we, back to Ian's point, there are those things about whose country is, who isn't, all those sort of things. But we'll get it right. The development processes are there. We're all good people following after the dictates of Ian when he was in Aboriginal affairs. We've learned governance laws and we've learned all of those wonderful things that are outside the way we operate. But it is, the world turns, things changed. We said right at the start of this that if it wasn't for the Royal Commission, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to have the voice. And there are so many things that are then tied up in it. But roles and responsibilities, I think, form a part of it. And young people fill the roles, young people accept the responsibilities, and it makes it easier. I mean, I can't imagine ever being retired, but it's the sort of thing about the people who are emerging, people who are coming, people who are developing. And if you recall, when I saw you come in, and I first spoke to you, why aren't you up here in this panel? And I think that's that's a good question, not just for me, but to say, well, they're coming, so it's good.
And can I just add to that, Alf? I mean, a young fellow sits around the table at the Justice Forum.
Yep.
And because the Justice Forum sees it's very important to have the young people involved, and the Youth Council became part of the Justice Forum. It's significant to bring up the issues in regards to young people. I mean, the Aboriginal, and I'm sorry about harping on about the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, but the Aboriginal Justice Agreement has got a provision there to assist young kids to go through to university. And we have, since the AJA has been in place, where once before there might have been one or two, and I think it was Carmel Barry and somebody else working in Department of Justice, we now got over 180 Aboriginal people involved in working in justice as a number of capacities, different roles. 68 of them are Aboriginal elders and respected persons. They work on a casual basis, and so with in the courts area we have, I think it's 95 Aboriginal people working in the courts right across the different programs. So I mean, never before was there a lot of opportunities for people to get into positions, and there's a lot of young people getting into roles that they have never ever got into before. And that's a real bonus. I mean, you have a look at our Aboriginal Justice EOs, our executive officers for the Rajaks. They're all very young, very well-versed and very enthusiastic with what's happening in their own community. And I think, Greg, you were very much, you've learnt a lot since you've been on the Aboriginal, around the table around the Aboriginal Justice Forum, but you also have a very powerful voice there and for young people. So that's great.
If I was to answer that question of what is the biggest challenge or what's the difference in challenges, comparing 30 years ago to now, there's quite a range of different challenges, but I think there is a consistent challenge that happens not just to Aboriginal people, to everyone, and it's a generational challenge. One of the things that, particularly through VIAC, or not VIAC, Koori Youth Council it's called now, I'm showing my age, it's terribly comfortable, easy and lazy to try and make the new generation live the lives that the old generation did. To see the world how we saw it. To get them to fight the fights that we want fought because that's the fights that we know. That's a terribly easy thing to do. It's a terribly comfortable thing to do. I would say the biggest challenge for the current young generation of Aboriginal people, and it's the challenge for us as the older generations of people, and I'll publicly put this out there now, I turn 50 next year and I don't want to turn 50. But a challenge for me is to remind myself that at the age of Greg, I didn't want to live the life that those who came before me did. And the challenges for me 30 years ago were different to what it was for 30 years before them. The challenges for young Aboriginal people now, we still have a disproportionate amount of people who are disadvantaged across a range of things, but they are increasingly becoming a minority within the Aboriginal community. Those things that we fought for 30 years ago, people who've been brought after that take for granted. The idea of welcome to country. 30 years ago, the notion of that was just not conceivable even to the Aboriginal community, let alone anyone else. Now, it's par for the course. Next Tuesday, the 44th Australian Parliament, on the first day that Parliament sits, is commencing with a welcome to country ceremony in King's Hall of Parliament. It's just what happens. So that's a standard thing. So that we've moved on. The really big challenges that I see for for the next generation, which is what does the world look like in the year 2035? Well, I tell you what it won't look like if I had anything to do it, exactly as it does in the year 2013. It can't look like that. Otherwise, we will be doing nothing. I actually want to get to a point where something as highlighted as the justice agreement is redundant, because we don't actually have any differentiation in the justice statistics, and in fact we've improved the justice system. But that also means a range of other things have to get their act together. The whole education system, the health system, the economic system, all those things. That conjures up a new range of challenges. As we become increasingly an affluent and aspirational and a community of different expectations, how does that affect us socially? What makes us us? If you ask me, the real challenge for the young generation now is maintaining that sense of Aboriginality, those core fundamentals which define us as a community, as that which defined us in the past starts to recede. Our history for the past 150 years, 200 years in this state has been built around being dispossessed, disassociated, all the dis stuff, and at the bottom of the social strata. Well, what if we come off that and that starts to disappear? What are the bigger challenges to maintain that very core sense of identity, who we are, if those things we've coalesced around start to recede? I'm an eternal optimist and hope by 2035 we have what we use as indicators now, we have equity on, but they're kind of sideshows to the big show. The big show is what fundamentally makes us, us, and how do we maintain that? And that's the big challenge for the younger people now, that in the year 2035 they look around and say, this is the Aboriginal community of our generation. And what does it look like? So, and I have no answer to that other than I eternally hope that those things which we highlight now as what we need to focus on are not there because of the work we do now to alleviate those and create new challenges for future generations.
Bigger, brighter future world, you reckon?
Yep.
I have a question for you.
Can I just say something else?
Yeah.
Just on that one, before you ask the question? Is that all right?
But of course.
I don't, I just interrupted Uncle Alf, which really is going to get me a rouse. We had one instance in the Koori Court where young people just took over, and they took over in a way where we weren't doing something for them, they were doing something for us. And it was a young bloke, and we were bending the rules already because we were conducting a children's court when we had no authority to do it. We just did it, and we did it because the panel, the elders, said we need to deal with these cases, and we did. And this young bloke came in and he got his case all finished, and at the end of it he spoke to one of the clerks and he said to them, I've got something for you and I'll bring it in the next little while. And we heard later that they were doing a painting. The TAFE kids were doing a painting. This was the kids, the young men themselves were doing this painting, and they wanted to gift it to the court. And I came round the corner there in Shepparton one Monday morning, and there was a bunch of young blokes out the front of the court, and I thought, oh God, there's been a riot on Saturday and we're going to deal with all these bail applications. It wasn't the case, and my assumption really got exploded by that. Talk about the assumptions you make. I went round the back, parked the car, came inside, and here was this bunch of lads. They had done the painting. The painting was black with background, and it had all their handprints on it. We took the painting away as the court got it framed, and then framed it and put it back in that court, and I think it is still there. And it's an example of how young people captured our agenda. They actually said to us something that we hadn't even thought about, and they said, we can do this. And it reminded me of the single most important thing that I reckon came out of the court for me and the other people involved from the white point of view. And Aunty Rochelle Patton at some stage or other was sort of talking about what we needed to do, and I just said, well, come on, Aunt, let's just go in there and you take over. And that expression, you take over, really started to embolden all of us, and emboldened me as a magistrate, I can tell you, because if there's more rule hidebound people than magistrates in the world, I'm yet to find them. But it emboldened everybody, and so the point about the youth question is they are constantly full of surprises. They constantly refresh the way we think about things. They constantly challenge the assumptions we make, and it's fantastic if they're in a position to take over, because that's exactly what happened that day, and it was fantastic.
So you got a question for everyone? There's also a question down the back as well.
Yeah, it's a question, I think, for everybody. 1800's the introduction of the White Australia policy. Does anybody know where it's buried? In all seriousness. Okay. Where? In the Labor government, Grasby, I think, was the immigration minister at the time, and there was this thing about killing it off and so on. But I just want to know where it's buried, because I haven't been able to find that. Because every so often, history in this country regurgitates that. And they're the things, and they're the sorts of things that our young people will continually have to guard against. And so if the larger community groups are not convinced about those things, or know exactly, not necessarily exactly, but where it is and what era it was done away with, then I think we're still going to have, a lot of the problems that we've faced that will need to be faced again. Anyway.
Thanks, sir. So we have a question down the back, and we probably then have time for one more. So if there's one, thanks, up the front here. So down the back first, and then up here.
Mine was generally a comment because I'm from Lake Tyers, where there was a 10-year intervention put in by the Justice Department, and it's Lydia Thorpe here. It's really hard to sit here and hear that there's really deadly things happening within the justice system and the agreements happening around the state. But where I come from, it's not deadly. We don't have kids going to school. We don't have kids finishing year 12. We have kids 10, 11 and 12 smoking dope and having sex. So I just think, where the failures are, Lake Tyers is a very good example. And maybe there needs to be work done there, but I think self-determination is the key. And I think if our young people, particularly, as young people have been brought up, if they were given the voice and the self-determination to decide on their path rather than a government come in and decide for them, I think we could see real change. But I just wanted to acknowledge my people at Lake Tyers.
Thank you. And we have one down the front here. The microphone's coming.
Thank you, Damien. Thank you. Look, I'm not very knowledgeable about the Koori Court, and I'm trying to learn as much as possible. Do Koori Courts operate anywhere else in Victoria? And within Shepparton, does a person have the choice as to which court they appear before? Can they choose to appear before a traditional court or a Koori Court? Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, yes, the person who appearing before the court, they choose to go into the Koori Court. They consent to have the matter heard in the Koori Court. And we've got courts, the Shepparton Broadmeadows were our pilot courts. Then we set up a court down at Warrnambool, which sits on circuit down at Portland and Hamilton. And we also have courts down at Bairnsdale, Latrobe Valley, and Swan Hill and Mildura. Our children's court was started up in Melbourne. We then had a children's court launched in Mildura. Just recently we've just been expanding where we have our adult Koori Court. We expanded to the children's jurisdiction. And the county court, as I said, sits in Melbourne and Latrobe Valley. Now, for matters to be heard in the particular Koori Court, it has to be satisfy the proper venue jurisdiction. So you either live in that area, in that jurisdiction or that area, or you've committed the crime there. So, but that Kate gave you an example of where there was an incident that occurred in another part of Victoria, but the matter was able to be transferred up to another court because of that family link. So it can be, yeah.
Okay, we have just a few minutes remaining. One of the privileges of standing on this box is that I got to see lunch come in. So while all of you were concentrating on these wise words, I was like, oh, what's in there? We have time for one more question, and then I'm going to get a final comment from the panel just after this question as well.
Hi, I'm actually a New South Wales person, but I wondered if the panel could respond to the young lady from Lake Tyers, because here she is representing a whole different story within what I would call a small state of Victoria. Yep. So her description of Lake Tyers community reflects to me what I know a lot about Northern Territory. So in this state, which is so small from my perspective, how we can have such a dysfunctional representation of a community that goes back historically to the beginning of colonisation in this state. So I would really be interested in if the panel has any comments about the dysfunction occurring there and the obvious advances of, that are occurring in Shepparton and the Curry Court, etc. What is being done from an Aboriginal community point of view to help the Lake Tyers community in all aspects of the dysfunction that was described?
All right, I'll answer that because I've probably had a fairly long-term involvement with the Tyers and the government response to Tyers. First and foremost, I suppose the 10-year renewal program, I think I need to preface this with a couple of things. There are differences of opinion within government and there are differences of opinion on things within the community, and that's a whole range of things, and Tyers is one of those. I think the Tyers renewal plan, worthy in conception, but its execution focused on symptom rather than the fundamental causes. And because it never did that, Lake Tyers as a community really hasn't come a long way over that 10 years. I think there are fundamental issues that have to do with how the people themselves who live at Tyers see themselves. I think there are issues to do with people who don't live at Tyers, how they see the people at Lake Tyers. They're more at the core of this than symptoms of improving housing, of having good roads, of having at one stage, I kid you not, I'm a career public servant, and I thought at one stage there was one public servant for every two people who lived at Tyers trotting on down for an IDC every 2 months, I think it was. I mean, it was worthy in it, it was noble in its intent, but its execution didn't fundamentally change where Tyers was over that time. And I remember being at barbecues or I think we tried to poison everybody by over charcoaling because the amount of barbecues we had down there was just ridiculous. But I remember at a number of IDCs there were people, the people at Tyers would kind of be almost an audience to the IDC going on. That's an interdepartmental committee, for those who don't know that lingo. And they'd be like an audience to it. And then in later years when they started to get involved, it was very much still done in that space of the people at Tyers doing what they'd always done in terms of government and trying to express what was ailing them at the time. And even in the Tyers community, you had different views and opinions and stances on stuff and disputes going on within the community. That's what happens. I think one of the things is, and I've encountered this with people across government all my working life, is those dag-nabbit Aborigines, why aren't they just one nice homogenous group who just say the same thing? Why can't they be like that? And Tyers is no different to that. And I think that that's one of the things that caused that 10-year renewal program to, as Lydia says now, and she's absolutely right, because I saw the statistics on this Wednesday. I actually saw the statistics on it. The kids at primary school are going to primary school. There's only one who actually hasn't had a good record of attendance in recent times. But you jump to secondary school, right at this point in time, only one child from Tyers is regularly attending secondary school from Lake Tyers. And there are a range of complex reasons around that. That's the other part, is there's never, ever, ever a single cause and effect. There are always a multitude of causes. And I think one of the problems that we've had with Tyers is trying to break it down to a single cause. or trying to break it down to a single resolution. Just as an aside, when people ask me, what is the one thing that we can do in Aboriginal affairs will make a big difference, the one thing we can do, my usual response is to nod politely and say, oh, you know, whatever it feels like. In my head, what I want to say to them, the biggest thing you can do is turn around and walk out the room, because there is no one single thing. There's everything, and we have to do it over a long period of time. So in response to the Lake Tyers situation, I think we probably need to re-understand Lake Tyers. I won't say re-look, re-understand it, reconceptualise what is Tyers as a township, and it is a town. I had this argument with people over different points. Lake Tyers is a town. It's where people live. It's got a regular population of about 150, 130. It has old people, it has young people, there are ups and downs. There's, the flash part of town, the not so flash part of town. It's a place where people live. So it's not an experiment. It's a place where people live, and we should look at it as a town, but be mindful that there's a whole range of complexities around that. And the really hard ones are the ones we have probably yet to fully understand. How do these people socially see themselves? How do they want to see themselves? How do we see them? Do we view them as something that can benefit from the collective wisdom of a 10-year renewal plan or not? I mean, I think there is some fundamental issues about how we do this. It's the same with the broader Aboriginal community. I don't regard myself as... how can I put this? I look at the Aboriginal community as one which has had, experienced great difficulty and still does, but I also view us as a people of great opportunity, unrealised opportunity, and a great people of hope. For me, I like to talk about what's good as well as what's bad, because if we don't do that, then where are we going to get? The people at Tyers, the kids at Tyers, the ones who are in primary school, if all we do is redo things that condemn them to have no aspiration beyond those circumstances that they find themselves in, then we have failed beyond words able to describe. So in that regard, I think we probably need to look at not just Lake Tyers, but a reconceptualisation of a whole range of different things, which is why I say 2035, that's my way of saying I've got Jasper, my 12-year-old, and Isabel, my 9-year-old. They now don't live with what I lived at their age. I certainly don't want them living the life that I have had. I want them to have a different place in the world. I want the kids at Tyers to have a different place in the world. I want there to be not an Aboriginal Prime Minister. I want a Prime Minister who is Aboriginal. When people say Aboriginal, it's like you're somehow a different thing. There are instances where that's important. There are other times where I think we need to change that. So for me, I think, not just in regard to Tyers, but in a whole lot of things, we need to reconceptualise what we mean and what we're about. Otherwise, we're just condemning the future to what we've done in the past. And it will take us longer to get to a place where we want to be than we otherwise would. I hope that kind of answers your question. I say all that from the senior bureaucrat. I was the manager of what was the Indigenous Issues Unit at the time that the Justice intervention at Tyers started. And I was the Executive Director of Aboriginal Affairs Victoria. For the bulk of that time, I had legislative responsibility for oversight of the Aboriginal Lands Act, which established Lake Tyers and Framlingham Aboriginal Mission. So I have very definite views from inside the camp, not the outside of it, and I think basically we got it wrong. Not because we meant to, but because acting in the limitations of people's capacity to think outside the square.
Okay.
By the way, that isn't a resignation from the public service for anybody who's watching this, but, career limiting, I'm good at that. But it's true. That's just how I think.
Okay, folks, we have run out of time. I know that it's probably reaching a point where we really want to dive into more conversation about it. We've heard about history. We've also heard about the powerful instrument that the justice agreement is. We've also been reminded of the tough reality that's out there. A final comment from each of the panel members in 10 seconds, 5 words or something like that. Could you leave us with a note about what are the big opportunities that you see in the next little while? What's the big stuff, the hopeful, the positive, the big things that are coming up next in 20 seconds each? And your time starts.
I mean, I'm seeing that having a Children's Commissioner for Aboriginal Children is a good way of been working with the community and the government to ensure that we look after the interests of the children that are going in and out of home care.
Terrific, thanks.
I'm a lawyer, so I love rules, but I'm saying that I reckon the best opportunity anybody's got is to bend everyone they find and to be bold about doing it and agile when avoiding the blows that follow.
The need to be able to know that those young people coming through, I think, is just so important for me and for others who've been around a while. Lake Tyre's downside is not peculiar just to Lake Tyres. It's across the state, obviously across the nation. And while there's been some good work that's been done, it's not utopia. There's more to come and it needs to be developed. And I'm really pleased that these young people are stepping up. That's great.
Mine would be, don't be afraid. Don't let fear stop you from doing things. Sometimes you've just got to be brave and leap off a cliff and do what you know to be right as opposed to what you might be expected to do. And if you do fall, if you do get knocked down back because of it, just get back up again and keep going.
And if you're leaping off the cliff, make sure you land on your feet.
Yeah.
Thank you.